Viewers, you are welcome to your favorite program, Eyewitness. As you are aware, each week we have a conversation with a Nigerian who has made an exceptional contribution to the life of the nation, who has pursued the public good, who has been engaged in community service, and whose life is about serving the public interests. The purpose of this program is to create another narrative that says not all Nigerians are corrupt, not all Nigerians are focused on self-service, not all Nigerians are interested in self-aggrandizement. So many Nigerians have been quietly making significant contribution to our society and to our nation, but often the media does not highlight that. That's where Eyewitness is different. Today, we are looking at the border. As a political scientist, I know borders are lines that separate the sovereignty internal to the nation from the outside world, which is beyond the borders of the country in question. In my discipline of political science, therefore, we have a rather simplistic view of the border, of frontiers. Our guest today is somebody who is the foremost in the African continent in motivating us to have a fuller and richer understanding of what borders are. He is today a very young man, just in his early 80s, and he has had decades and decades of engagement on the question of border, both in terms of research, policy development, and of course, the whole policy debate and polemics around borders. He's no other than Professor Anthony Asiwaju. Prof, you are welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Let's start by getting our viewers to know you. Tell us a bit about your background, primary education, secondary education. Where did you grow up?
Well, as you have said, my name is Anthony Asiwaju. I'm emeritus professor of comparative African history and borderland studies at the University of Lagos. I was born, first of all, of parentage that is cross-border. I was born in Imeko, which is a Nigerian Yoruba border town in Ogun State. That's where my mother originates from. My father, on the other hand, originates from Ketu, the sister border twins town across the border in the Republic of Benin. Both are Ketu Yoruba. I grew up in Adodo. Adodo is in the southern part of Ogun State. Both Imeko and Ado are in the Nigerian border areas of Ogun State. It was in Adodo that I went to school. I went to the primary school from 1949 to 1955, and then trained as a teacher in St. Louis Teacher Training College in Abeokuta from 1956 to 1959. I had a beautiful career as a teacher, primary school teacher, before admission into University of Ibadan. in 1963, where I bagged the BA Honours History in 1966 and went on to do a PhD in 1971. And of course, thereafter, my whole teaching career in University of Lagos up to retirement in 2004.
Your doctorate thesis, I suppose, must have been on this issue of borders.
Absolutely.
What was it on?
It was the impact of French and British colonialism on the Yoruba astride the Nigeria-Benin border. As you can see, this is a subject that was motivated, was encouraged by the doyen of African history, the late Professor Ajayi, who actually lured me into comparative history. I ended up with a very robust research career in borderland studies for the reason that borderland studies has so many disciplinary portals. History is in the forefront. Of course, your political science is also in it. Law is in it. Economics is in it. Anthropology is in it. Sociology is in it. But in my own case, my portal was history, African history, and comparative African history because it began with a comparative analysis of French and British impact on the Yoruba astride the Nigeria-Benin border, which became a book. It became a book in 1976, Western Yoruba land under European rule, a comparative analysis of French and British colonialism.
Fascinating. This famous line, borders are lines that divide. We love it in political science.
I know.
What's your view on it?
The political science perspective is certainly one of the scientifically acknowledged meanings. That is, borders functionally are lines that demarcate sovereign national territories. The modern national territory, which in Europe is nation states, and which in the ex-colonial world, really not nation states, but state nations. They are markers. They are markers of sovereign territories. However, while that is the perspective of state about boundaries, about modern state boundaries, the perspective on the ground, where the boundaries are drawn, through which the boundaries are drawn, is somewhat contrastive, because those boundaries are not just drawn through dry lands. They are drawn through human communities, pre-existing human communities, what I call historic populations, which I also, in my larger subsequent work, call partitioned culture areas, one of which groups I came from. From the point of view of such communities, the boundaries, yes, they are there, separating the nation states in which the cultural area is located, but they can hardly be accepted to be bound to be lines of separation, because the communities are trans-border, single entities, but split only by the boundaries. The local communities recognize the boundaries, but they cannot understand why you should separate them. That's why there is this popular response by the Ala K2 of K2 to Victor I just forgot his name now, who was in the late 50s conducting interview for his PhD thesis in geography. And he read the Alaketu of Ketu. And the Alaketu of Ketu was posed with this specific question. What do you think about the boundaries? They say, yes, the boundaries are there, but it is between the English and the French. It's between the French colons and the British colonialists. It is hardly recognized to be between us. The Yoruba remain the same across the border. And then once he said that, he spoke for the generality of partitioned culture areas in Africa. He spoke for the generality of partitioned culture areas everywhere in the world. Because for such areas to accept such boundaries as lines of separation is to give up their identity as a group, which identity is naturally cross-border.
Yeah, that's really fascinating that these borders have communities, and these communities have real lived lives.
Absolutely.
And therefore, this separation can only work in certain ways for these communities. We'll come back to that, but I want to take you to a certain Muhammadu Buhari,
Yes.
who is the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Yes.
I'm talking of Buhari the First in 1984, when he took over power.
Yes.
You did your inaugural lecture
Absolutely.
in December that year,
Yes.
knowing fully well the attitude of President Buhari,
Yes.
then head of state Buhari,
Yes.
to borders.
Yes.
A lot of people thought you were a bit foolhardy, given the fact that so many people are going to jail.
Yes.
But anyway, what was that famous inaugural lecture on, and what was Buhari's response in terms of the border in 1984? 85.
I was appointed professor of history in June 1978. And of course, the normal ritual in the university, the British tradition, is for a professor of history, a newly appointed professor, to give an inaugural lecture, which means to bring to the public knowledge what he professes, what exactly are his understanding of himself in terms of contribution to knowledge that has led to his appointment as professor. At that time, in 1984, in 1978, I was still pursuing this comparative colonial impact on cross-border people. First the Yoruba, and then I expanded it to the Akan between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, between the Morsi, between what you now call Burkina Faso and Ghana, the Wolof, across the border of the Gambia, today's Gambia, and the Senegal, and so on. those are the things I was doing. So when I became professor, I then chose to do a lecture on comparative colonialism. But then, on appointment as professor, I switched research focus and focused directly on issue of boundaries and impact of boundaries on communities that are immediately impacted by those boundaries. That was why, by the time I decided to do my inaugural lecture, I decided to do it strictly on border factor in African history, modern African history. So it's titled Artificial Boundaries. And this was in the heat of the border closure under General Buhari in his first coming as a military head of state. That lecture was immediately, instantaneously policy sensitive, and the administration was very interested in what it was going to contain. And so, 2 days before the lecture, messages came from NSO. It was NSO then.
Nigerian Security Organization.
Exactly.
The predecessor of the DSS.
DSS. And they went to my vice chancellor to let them have a
copy,
an advanced copy of the lecture. So my vice chancellor, Adeshola, then said, he doesn't see inaugural lectures until they are delivered. If they want an advanced copy, they must go to the lecturer. I was dean of us. So they came to me. And we were still trying to dot the I's and cross the T's. So I took them, 2 of them, to my secretariat. And they saw it. So I told them they should come back on the day of the lecture, which was Wednesday. They came on a Monday. And that even what they are correcting, by the time I deliver it might have changed. But if they came to be at the lecture, when I finished, when I came down the podium, that which I pronounced, I will give it to them, the original. And so they came, and I gave them the lecture. And that was what led to the anxious, anxiety-packed invitation to the Barracks for me to see the head of state the following Friday. So I went, the whole community thought it was going to happen.
Straight to jail. You will not pass go.
But very paradoxically, I received a red carpet reception at the Barracks. The head of state couldn't see me. He wanted really to receive me personally, but it was the day new ambassadors were presenting their credentials. So I was received by the second in command, the then chief of staff, the late today Idiagbon. And that was how the lecture was praised. And the lecture really was an exercise, innocuous exercise in scholarship. And all I argued was that the boundaries from the point of view of locality have no padlock. Therefore, the idea of closing is totally out of tune with the reality on the ground. Rather than closing, when borders are officially closed, that's when they are open to big-time business. And who loses? The government who closes the border loses. But more importantly, the local people are subjected to untold, limitless suffering. And that was the picture that was, and the administration surprisingly understood it and appreciated it. And then they said, but then I suggested further research that most who was, in fact, I was told that after the delivery of the lecture, day and night, morning, afternoon, and morning, there was the meeting on this lecture, up to the time I was invited to the Dam Barracks, and that they have nothing but praise. And that what further research did I want to do? And I told them I wanted to do an ethnographic survey of the Nigerian boundaries to present the picture of the human envelope of those boundaries, so that government will know that when it does close borders, it's not just borders on the ground, but borders in the midst of people. So that was how I got involved in NIPS, the National Institute for Policy
And strategic
Studies.
We'll come back to the policy dimension.
Yes.
But I want us to complete the Muhammadu Buhari story.
Yes.
Because 2019, I think,
Yes.
he again closed the borders. When you have convinced him and his people that that's the wrong policy move.
Yes.
It means he forgot all the good advice you gave him, Prof, and his people thought made so much sense?
Prof, I wouldn't say so. But what it suggests is some kind of memory. It's not memory loss, because he knows that what happened in 1984, 86, because even after he was forced out of power in 1985, the border closure continues. So it is a decision of the administration. But it was opened in 1986. So in 2019, when I heard the border was closed again, I was a little bit perturbed. You know, I wasn't sure whether, what happened. I wouldn't know what actually happened. But what I know was that it was a repeat. It was a repeat of 1984, 1986, a repeat of all that happened that time, including the obvious unsustainability of border closure as an approach to the problem of cross-border challenges. So this is what most people don't know. In December, at the 35th anniversary of that inaugural lecture in 1984, I also gave a lecture at University of Lagos, sponsored by the Faculty of Arts, where I went through this concerned but responsible critique of the second border closure. And I was hoping that responses would come like it came in 1984, but it never came. And even now, the borders are still not completely open officially, but indeed, on the ground, nothing has happened.
Let's be concrete. I've spoken to some of the members of government.
Yes.
And they are talking of specific policy in the interest of Nigeria. One is rice. Nigeria's rice production has been increasing considerably, but our neighbors are importing rice and smuggling it to Nigeria and harming our farmers. Secondly, there's concern over arms flow to Nigeria. So to protect the interests of Nigerians, that's why the Buhari administration decided to close the borders. That makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. I will even add to rice the siphoning of Nigerian petroleum products
Yes.
across the border and several other things. Well, the truth, of course, is that the truth of the matter is that clandestine cross-border trade, parallel trade, others call it, contraband, that's another name, unrecorded trade, unofficial trade, provide network through which the other more heinous, more criminal activities also take place. Armed smuggling, for example, human trafficking. They all take advantage of the same cross-border network. So it is from that point of view that the need for a very systematic, a serious border policy is required. But what I'm saying is that closure is obsolete. Nobody does it. A few states take to border closure because of what I said earlier, that the border is not a wall with doors with padlocks. They are open terrain.
That's why Trump wanted a wall between the US and Mexico.
Did it work?
They didn't build all of his wall, and he's still very upset with the Americans. But that's another story. Let's remain on Nigeria.
But it's another story that is very germane to the futility of building walls. So, some suggestions have been made even in our own case here too, to build walls. But it will work. What will work is a systematic border policy articulation and implementation. And I made serious suggestions about this in the inaugural election of 1984. And the follow-up to what Nigeria did in adopting a border policy for Nigeria that became attractive to our neighbors and became generalized for ECOWAS, Cross-Border Initiatives Program, and was raised to the level of the continent itself by the way of African Union Border Program. They all came from the initiatives here in Nigeria, and I was involved at all the levels.
Okay, so let's now go back to the policy development. 84, 85, when you had the discussions with the Buhari military regime, there were suggestions that new policies will be developed.
Yes.
And you were to be part of that process.
Yes.
In NIPS. What was that initiative about?
We carried out, you see, we were in pursuance of my desire for a detailed ethnographic survey of Nigerian boundaries. Remember, the inaugural lecture itself is on artificial boundaries. Artificial from the point of view of
the people
realities on the ground. The people on the ground, the terrain on the ground, the geography on the ground. So, the examples are given across the world. Africa first, but the wider world. And so, in pursuance of that plan, that desire to do a detailed ethnographic survey, that was what the NIPS Border Defense and Security Project was focused on. And we have a beautiful team of experts, historians, geographers, political scientists, lawyers among us, and the boundaries are divided into segments, and all of us are charged with specific segments. I was charged.
Well, we'll come back to the outcome of that research.
Yes.
Meanwhile, viewers will take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. We are still with Professor Anthony Asiwaju, Africa's leading expert on border studies. You are just about to explain the research and policy initiative
Yes.
initiated in Kuru, the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies.
Exactly.
What were the major lines of those policy developments?
Now, the research project submitted this report in 1987, but there was a midterm report because, as you can, from what I've just said, the borders remain closed even beyond General Buhari's regime as military head of state. So it remained closed up to March 1986. The research was still continuing, but it was a report, the midterm report of that research that led the succeeding military administration to open the borders in March 1986. And when the National Boundary Commission was then established, and the National Boundary Commission was the instrument that defines the new border policy for Nigeria. Before that, all our borders are under different administrations. Niger border, for example, was under National Planning Commission. Benin border was under the supervision of Ministry of Works. The Chad border was under the Ministry of Water Resources. It was the Nigeria-Cameroon border, Nigeria-Equatorial Guinea border, because of the sensitivities that were arising, strategic challenges that were arising on those two borders, that brought it under the supervision of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there is this uncoordinated. The National Boundary Commission put a stop to that because the National Boundary Commission itself is a multi-ministerial body that consists of ministers and heads of parastatals that took charge of this differently. Two, the National Boundary Commission was to have in its midst membership of ministries, education, health, that are also germane because we pleaded for the issue of the welfare of border communities. Our border areas are structurally neglected, There are also other interests that are in the National Boundary Commission. It's coordinated, it's centralized. And the National Boundary Commission was saddled with issues of international boundaries, relations between us and our neighbors. There is also the internal boundaries between the states, between the local government areas, between the community, because those are also boundaries that pose a lot of problems. So the National Boundary Commission became the ideal, the model, flagship border governance establishment under the chairmanship, statutory chairmanship of the vice president. And all of us, the decree setting up the commission made provision for appointment of 2 members, non-ex officio members. All of them are ex officio members, except 2. And it was how I was drawn into it. And my colleague, the professor who took charge of the NIPS research project, Professor Imobike of blessed memory, was also brought in. We were 2 outside the big wigs. So, and it worked beautifully. It worked beautifully because it doused the conflict that were festering between us and our neighbors. And because of that, we also use the same principles of cross-border cooperation, consultations with our neighbors, border region development focus, and so on and so forth, on internal boundaries too. And that's why I thought that it worked up to 2019, as far as I am concerned, because the success of the National Boundary Commission of Nigeria is to be measured by the extent to which it became an idea bought by our neighbors, even far away Mali, and then ECOWAS, and then African Union. So the Nigerian experimentation became the base, which also operates at 3 levels, national, state committee, boundary committee, local government boundary committee. So what we have in the African Union border program is a more comprehensive, more continental instrument that also operates on the principle of subsidiarity, continental, the REX, the national, the bilateral, and the local community. The local community became the focus. So that's why I thought it has worked. And but how we then came to go back, why the dog went back to his own vomit in 2019 was what was a little bit baffling. There is a border policy in Nigeria, and it was well defined, and it was implemented with a lot of discipline on the part of the state, on the part of the communities. And as I said, at the risk of repeating myself, it became something that our neighbors found imitable. And they did. And it now is grown into a continental instrument. And the issue of border community development, border region development, which was created as a result of the National Conference on border region development, the first of its kind in this country, in 1989, August 1989, which led to the creation of a national boundary development committee. It was a development of the House. It was a committee of the whole of the commission. You know, that underscores the importance attached to the issue of development of the border areas. Now, in 2009, that directorate in the National Boundary Commission became an agency in itself, the Border Communities Development Agency. So we have the National Boundary Commission, we have the Border Communities Development Agency, all of them operating under the aegis of the presidency. These agencies are all statutorily chaired by the vice president. So we have a well-defined.
Only that people in government decided to go back to the days of before.
Yeah.
Okay, Prof, let's look at this issue of, you are very vehement that border closure is not the solution.
No.
For a country like Nigeria, the cost of smuggling is very high.
Yes.
What can you do to reduce those terms smuggling that is not the all-important thing of closing the border?
I have said it again and again, and I will still say it at this program, that the problem of cross-border trade, which in statist terms is smuggling, is structural. It's a structural problem. There is a problem posed by the boundary, by borders, and manifests in terms of asymmetry. Asymmetry in the economic policies, asymmetry in the market arrangements, asymmetry in terms of goods that prevail on this side as against those that prevail on this side. The asymmetry of two parallel markets. That is the structural situation that traders take advantage of, and that other criminals also take advantage of. We have to face the problem of policy harmonization. I've said it again and again that the problem of the borders is best solved by regional integration within the regional integration framework. And within that regional integration framework, the issue of policy harmonization is critical. It's critical. Nigeria must engage its neighbors, and in doing so, show the example it has shown this far to other parts of the world. How do we harmonize?
Yeah.
Let me give you a quick example of how it works. In the 1980s, in the heat of the NIPS research project, the major issue was not rice. It was not petroleum products. The major issue was cocoa smuggling. It was cocoa smuggling that harmed the economy of Nigeria very, very badly, especially during the Civil War, because cocoa smuggling began about late 1960s after the Civil War, and then into early 1990s. And it continued and it continued. But it came to an abrupt end once not by a systematic decision, but practical response to the issue of smuggling of cocoa when Nigerian government removed import license on cocoa and in fact disbanded cocoa board as it disbanded other commodity boards. Once that happened, and the price of cocoa was floated economically. The receiving price for the commodity here rose and leveled up with the
price
hitherto asymmetry across the border. You know what happened?
No.
The pyramids, it's not just groundnut pyramids that happened in the era of groundnut pyramids. There were also cocoa pyramids across the border during the period I am talking about. The pyramids began to return to Nigeria because there was no point going across the border to export through the autonomous port of Cotonou. And that was how, up to today, you can talk about other things that are smuggled, it is not cocoa. And before that, it was the asymmetry that was there that attracted our own cocoa smuggling across the border into Benin Republic. Even sometimes ridiculously, when the western border became very, very hot with soldiers and so on and so forth, the traders, I usually like to call them traders. The traders began
I call them smugglers.
You call them smugglers, yes. The traders began to move the cocoa commodities across the Nigeria-Niger border into Niamey, rebagged in Niamey, exported to the autonomous port of Cotonou, and re-exported to Europe. I mean, it took that kind of ridiculous form. Sahelian cocoa. I mean, where can it grow? Where can cocoa grow in the Sahel? But so
not possible.
We need to take the issue of harmonization very, very seriously. It's hard bargaining. Of course, it is give and take, and I think that the trade liberalization protocol of ECOWAS provide us with the framework for doing the more serious work of negotiation between our neighbors to harmonize policy. Otherwise, if what we forbid is what they allow, the cocoa smuggling, for example, when it left the plantations in Ekiti, the plantations in Ondo, the plantations in Osun, the plantations in Ogun, they are banned. They are banned. But those who received the products in Benin Republic were licensed. They were licensed by the government of Dahomey, which became Benin later. That's the point I'm making about asymmetry.
So if we want to stop smuggling of
Yes.
fuel to Niger, to Benin and all that, we have to match up the prices. Well, Nigerians don't want that.
We must match up the prices and organize fuel distribution, fuel marketing, not within Nigeria, but across the border. And I want to say this, Prof, that even the government of Benin, Kum government, they themselves frown at the smuggling of petroleum products because it has not allowed the normal, they have normal filling stations, but they are not functioning except in the cities. Except in the cities. So I can see some coincidence of want on both sides, but it has not been fully exploited.
Yes, this fascinating policy discussion. I hope those in government are listening to this, that the killer policy response of just completely closing the border doesn't work. You have to zero in on what are the things being smuggled out, why, find out the reasons, and address the problem. We only have 3 more minutes, Prof. I know there's a compendium of your work that has just been published.
Yes.
It's called Bridging African Boundaries.
Yes.
And it will be launched in Abuja soon.
Yes.
Can you tell us what's the content and when it will be launched in Abuja?
I became inspired, as one grows old, you become concerned about what happens after. And I became really...
You go to heaven, that's what happens.
I became really obsessed by what happens to the field of research that has taken us this far to be able to influence policy at national, at regional, at continental level, comparative African history, borderland studies. I'm in search of disciples. We have quite a number here and outside here. But I want to possess the younger ones coming behind us. It's a field that is a little bit challenging. But I then said the only way is to make my writings available. So there are 3 books that have been published based on primary research. The first was the book I told you that grew out of my PhD thesis in 1976.
Yes.
Then the follow-up studies of cross-border colonial impact that I did, the Akan, the Morsi, the Wolof, and so on, that I also brought together as a book of readings in 2001. And then those writings that I did, when I changed focus of research from colonial boundary to border factor in African history, all of these are out of print. And they were calling for reissuance. And then I said, rather than issuing them one by one, I should bring them together in a compendium. And that was what has been done. I am very pleased with the project. It was published in late December last year. Bridging African Boundaries, Cross-Border Areas, and Regional Integration in Comparative History and Policy Advocacy. And it's published by Pan-African University Press in Texas, in United States of America. And is to be launched on the 7th of July, 2022. The idea of that book launch is not about people coming to donate money. I want bulk purchase by people who have resources, because the book is expensive. As it is, it's very, very expensive. The limb is about 972 pages, cover to cover. And the limb is 20,000. The case is 25,000. An average student cannot
Pay them.
and it's meant for graduate students and faculty. So I want people who can buy in large number that we can donate to university libraries, research libraries, specialized institutions that would use these works for the purpose for which they were undertaken in the first instance.
Very inspiring. Thank you so much, Professor Asiwaju. I invite our viewers to come to the NUC on the 7th of July, where they can purchase copies of this compendium
For institutions.
on Nigerian and African boundaries. And those with resources, please make the effort to buy for your institutions, for other institutions, for postgraduate students, for university libraries. Thank you so much, Professor, for your great insights onto the question of boundaries. And you have really lifted our understanding on these lines that divide, that for communities on the borders, they see the commonality, the communities they were born into and grow up in, rather than division. Thank you. Viewers,
Thank you very much.
have a good day.